a real pleasure for me to be here. This whole area of caring for creatures, for animals, has been something that I have been concerned about for many, many years. And it's lovely for me to be speaking to you, because quite often I speak about these things in context where people aren't completely convinced. And so it's really lovely to speak here where I know that I am fully among friends. And I did think that by this stage of the morning, having heard so many others and looking at who they were and what their backgrounds were, I thought probably maybe nearly every aspect of theology that I might have wanted to have covered might have been covered. And knowing that we were getting towards lunch, I thought I might actually just do more of a personal reflection as to how I've become engaged and interested and concerned for these issues, and then draw in a little bit of biblical reflection along the way as I do that. Because I was brought up, I've always been a Christian, brought up in a very strongly biblical-based family, missionaries through and through, evangelism, church planting, right at the heart of my family, and my family going back through generations, and how I was brought up. And animals never really featured as a part of the Christian understanding that I inherited. A deep appreciation for the natural world, a deep love of the natural world, but never entirely an understanding that our Christian faith might have something to say about animals. And then at the start of my adult life, when I was at university and in the early years of my marriage, I would say that God took me and my now husband on a kind of fast track around issues particularly of social justice and issues of poverty and caring for other people. And for me, that took a slant that was very definitely environmental. And I read a book around the biblical basis for environmental care that really was like an epiphany. It was like the scales fell from my eyes as I suddenly saw for the first time that actually the Bible was relevant for the whole world and had something to say about the whole world and not only human beings. And I think a key moment for me was one time reflecting, I think in the early years of my marriage it would have been, reflecting on the incarnation. So at that point I was going through a period where I was particularly interested in feminist theology. I was finding myself in many different leadership contexts where I was the only woman. And so feminist theology was being really helpful for me as I was working all of this through. And as I thought about the incarnation, I thought, how is the incarnation relevant for feminist theology? Because Jesus came as a man. The creeds, everything I say, the Bible that I read tells me that Jesus came as a man. He didn't come as a woman, he came as a man. And then I came to understand that actually coming as a man meant, of course, coming as a human being. And so women were included in that, shock horror, but they are. And so Jesus didn't just come as a man, he came as a human being. So then I was beginning to extend that. Well, what relevance does that have beyond human beings? Because he didn't come as a slug or a tree or as a leopard or my bunny rabbit or what have you. He came as a human being. And then it was this moment when the penny dropped, when I suddenly realized that thinking that way was as a result of my theology, which separated human beings out from everything else that had been made. And actually, yes, Jesus came as a human being, but more importantly, he became sarx, he became flesh. He entered into his creation. So being a human being isn't an exclusive thing, it is being part of the whole natural world. And at that moment, this very strong pair of hermeneutical glasses that I'd been carrying for so long got taken off, and a new pair of glasses were put on that then opened my eyes to how much of the Bible was relevant to the whole of what God had made, and how I was reading it through exclusively anthropocentric, human-focused lenses. So I realised, as I'm sure you will have realised many years ago, that Genesis 9, the covenant of God to Noah, as I'd been brought up to read it, actually was a covenant with Noah and with all living creatures. Some 5-6 times, I think it says it in Genesis 9. I realised when I read John 3:16, as has already been referred to, for God so loved people. Isn't what? It doesn't say that. It was such a shock when I suddenly realised it said, for God so loved the world. Colossians 1:19-20. I had been brought up very strongly to believe that Jesus' blood was shed on the cross for me, for you, for all people around the world. Now, I still believe that, so don't worry. But Colossians 1:19-20 broadened my understanding out, and I realised that, again, I'd been reading for so many years that Jesus' blood was shed on the cross to reconcile all people to God. And actually it says to reconcile all things. It's that tapanta again, the all things, that everything. And so these new glasses helped me to see what relevance the scriptures had, and helped me to see that creation, redemption, salvation was about all that God had made, not only human beings. Animals suddenly featured in my theology, and they suddenly featured in my understanding, and therefore they suddenly featured in how I needed to live. And one of the things that really impacted that then was thinking about food, and this has come up many times, hasn't it? When my children were born, I was suddenly faced with the question of, what do I want to put into their tiny bodies? I want them to grow up good and healthy. I don't want to fill their bodies with chemicals and pesticides and rubbish and lots of salt and sugar and E-numbers and etc., etc. So that got me looking at the food industry, got me thinking around issues of organic, and opened my eyes to this whole massive thing that is the food industry, and got me moving along those lines. And as a part of that, I began questioning meat and the sort of meat that we were eating as a family and that I was feeding my children. And I came to that realization, as I know we all have here, that if we are going to eat meat, and I know there will be a spectrum of views around that here, if we are going to eat meat, then it really matters how animals are kept. And I came to understand that actually that wasn't a fringe issue for me as a Christian. This was a central part of my theology. It mattered. This was a theological statement, what sort of meat at that stage I would or would not buy. And one of my responses to that has been one of the best things for us as a family, and we began keeping pigs. This was at a stage a good number of years ago when the question, should a Christian eat meat at all, wasn't featuring in my thinking at that point. At that point, what I was interested in was the welfare of the animals that we were eating. And I was lucky to be part of a really wonderful small group in my church. Very left-wing, am I allowed to say that? I'm not sure. Very switched on, not implying that the two go hand in hand. And really already quite a number of us already keeping chickens and growing our own vegetables and so on. And one evening, after a long discussion in our cell group, we decided we were going to start keeping pigs together. And so from out of that developed this pig cooperative that I was part of for about 10 years, and it spawned other pig cooperatives, and it became a massive thing, other ones that developed from it. It was a wonderful community thing and was fantastic for us as a family, and really opened our eyes and my children's eyes to where meat comes from, and to many of the areas of caring for animals and the animal issues that we have been hearing about today. We kept pigs for about 10 years, I think. Our diet has now changed so much as a family that we don't keep them anymore. But those 10 years were wonderful, and they gave my kids... We live on a council estate as part of a choice we made many years ago to move and live somewhere where we could get very involved in the local community. So keeping these pigs about 6 miles from where we live gave my children access to nature in a way that they wouldn't have had on this council estate, and I know has been very formational for them. Again, someone, it might have been Dominic, talked about pigs loving to be scratched. One of my best, was it you, Margaret? Yeah, sorry. One of my most wonderful memories is when the pigs had been fed. They were a bit mad before they'd been fed, but once they'd been fed, they calmed down. And going off to do something, coming back and finding my eldest daughter, who was probably about 10, sitting on the ground, and we had 8 or 10 pigs in this particular enclosure. And she had, if you can imagine, the spokes of a wheel with her sitting in the middle. It was like she had this whole circle of pigs around her that were all lying down, one of which had its head in her lap, and then the others were all lying down. And she was keeping them there. She was scratching them. And when she scratched them, they just, they're like dogs. They were just so happy. And she was totally happy too. They were both in their element. So keeping pigs has been a formative thing for us as a family. And like I say, our diet has now changed, so we don't anymore. But it has been important for us. I want to bring our time to an end just by reflecting on 3 scriptures that have been particularly important for me as I have gone through the last 20 years or so, trying to live in ways that take care of the whole world and respect it and look after it. The first, really obviously, is Genesis 1 and the creation account that we have there. Often the emphasis in that is placed on Genesis 1:26 to 28 and our distinctiveness in terms of being the only creature that is made in God's image. But what has become really important to me has been, yes, recognising that, and we might want to discuss that maybe in our panel later, but actually recognising that in every other respect we are the same as all the other creatures. We're not given our own special day. Now that should say something in and of itself and should be humbling. We might think, we ought to have had our own day of creation, but we haven't. We are simply made with the other creatures. We are also, along with other creatures, given that command, the blessing, to go forth and multiply, but other creatures are given that too. When God breathes into Adam's nostril, that's not God breathing a soul into humans to separate them out from other creatures. That's a really terrible misreading of the passage. Other creatures in Genesis 1 are also described as having the breath of God in them. We share that with other creatures. We are the same on every level except for the fact that we have been made in God's image. And that has been important to me. Secondly, Proverbs 12, verse 10, a little verse that's not often referred to in a book that's not often referred to. The NIV translates this really blandly, and as the NIV often does anyway, and it says that the righteous person cares for their animals. The actual translation of that, the literal words, are that the righteous person knows the soul of their animals. Isn't that beautiful? Firstly, the soul, nephesh. That in itself tells us that whatever the soul might be, we humans aren't the only ones to have it. Animals also have souls. Don't ask me any more what that might mean. I'm sure some of our other esteemed panellists will have some ideas on that. And then rada, to know, is actually the word that elsewhere is used of sexual intercourse. Someone knew someone else. Now, that's not to mean that we take it down the route, as we get towards lunch, that you might be thinking. But it is to highlight why is it used of sexual intercourse? Because there's that deep connection there, isn't there? The righteous person knows the soul. What beautiful connection there is, knows the soul of their animals. And we've heard a little bit about that already this morning. I think of my eldest daughter with our house rabbit. who she was cuddling him yesterday and talking to him. And I thought, you know the soul of your animal, beautiful animal, sleeps under our bed at night, is a right old character, but I won't try not to get into that more. The righteous person knows the soul of their animals. And then finally, Revelation 4, with that vision of worship taking place in heaven with the 4 living creatures, one of which is like a human, and then the others are other aspects of the creaturely world. And there's no hierarchy there, is there? We're the one that's like a human isn't closer to the throne or anything. There's total equality there. Now, you might know that Revelation 4 the book of Revelation isn't always a vision of the future. Often, particularly in this part around Revelation 4, actually it's a vision of the present. It's what is happening now. So this isn't just, this is what the future's going to be like. This is what is happening in heaven now. That all creatures are coming together to worship God. And we see glimpses of that elsewhere, don't we, in some of the Psalms that have already been mentioned. And as we close this morning's session, I wanted to leave you with that vision in Revelation 4. Yes, something to be worked towards in the future, but actually something to be actualized now. It is happening in heaven now. So as we pray, may your will be done. May your kingdom come on this earth now, as it is currently happening in heaven. That is what we are working towards, working into, living our lives for, that we might enable all creation to worship and to sing God's praises along with ourselves. Thank you.